Hello again and welcome to the program. I am Suren. It was a while ago when I met a man who was very rich, and truly he did not know what to do with his wealth. After all, he has been helped by a certain woman who fell in love with him and gave him a huge amount of money. And he invested, apparently, by buying petrol stations, but also conducted some hidden away illegal trades on the city streets. It was a very highly wealth promoting and supposedly also very spiritual business, as he claimed. However, he considered everybody who were wealthy as being real human. Others who were unfortunate, he considered them as not worthy humans. He called them also with certain explicits. He proved to me and to all his friends that for a man to be a man will not need riches to show off, and alas, his friendship was always bound to remain fake. Once upon a time, there was an old and poor farmer who worked very hard in his farm. He had a son who was very young at the time. Occasionally, they spoke about poverty and riches while they worked hard. The young boy was growing up while wishing he was very rich, because some of his friends were very well-off backgrounds. One day, the king has sent his men to fetch young men from the farms and from the nearby villages for a conscripted military service. And this young man was also amongst them. He hugged his father one more time and kissed his cheeks and said, my father, I promise to you, I will be very, very rich and come back to you as the king of the country." And the old farmer had a good long look at his son. Laughingly he said, "Oh yes, my son, you will be very, very rich, and you might become even a king. Who knows?" A few years passed, and the old man remained in his farm, doing his usual chores. On the other hand, his son succeeded in many of his undertakings, and finally he indeed became the king, sitting in luxurious surroundings in his palace. It was then he remembered. He asked his servants to go and fetch his father, the poor farmer, from the farm, and bring him to the front of his throne. The poor farmer was in absolute shock, but happy to be taken to the palace of the king. They brought him in front of his son in a tantalizing fashion, as it was their custom, forcing him kneel down in honor of the mighty king, who was his son. And the king said thus unto his father, "Father, oh my father, I love you so much. You see, just as I promised, I was to become a king. And here thou art, and here I am, your king." There was a brief pause, and quiet. After a little while, the farmer spoke to the king, who was his son, and his new king. "Oh, yes, my son, I love you so much. You indeed kept your promise. You achieved so much, and now you are the mighty king. I admire you. I salute you. After a pause, he said unto his son, "O my son, indeed you have become the king, but you have not become a man." Similar to becoming very rich with a huge amount of buying power, but becoming men takes a lot more than just riches, and riches don't buy the power to become a man. One thing is certain: buying power does not define what it means to be a man. Being a man is a complex concept with a variety of dimensions that go beyond the financial status. While buying power can certainly influence a person's lifestyle and choices, but it does not determine their identity or gender. Buying power is the ability to afford goods and services, and it influences all individuals regardless of gender. We might ask, why is this so? And that does not define masculinity. It really is about economic status and nothing else. That's it. Buying power is a measure of an individual's ability to buy things and is not tied to gender roles or even expectations. Many people have low purchasing power, and surely not all men have high purchasing power, and this does not change their gender identity. In fact, gender is a social construct, as we realize. It goes beyond biological sex, and it is not determined by how much money someone has. In short, buying power is about economic ability, not about being a man. A man's identity is determined by their personal qualities and choices, not by their ability to buy things. One discovers some gems in Investopedia. I don't know if you're familiar with it, wherein Adam Hayes says, purchasing power refers to how much money you can buy with a unit of currency, and explains further. What purchasing power is. Purchasing power describes the amount of products or services that a single unit of money can acquire, reflecting the real-world value of currency in the marketplace. Because of the rising prices effectively decreases the numbers of goods and services that one unit of money can buy, and that is most certainly due to what is called inflation. He includes key takeaways. 1. Inflation erodes the purchasing power of currency over time. 2. Central banks adjust interest rates to try to keep prices stable and maintain the purchasing power. So, one, US measure of purchasing power is the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. It clearly describes the globalization, having linked the currencies more closely than ever, and so protecting purchasing power worldwide being crucial. Understanding, however, the purchasing power. Purchasing power affects every aspect of economics. from consumer buying goods to investments or buying stock for, say, our country's economic prosperity. Remember? Inflation reduces the currency's purchasing power. Similarly, loss of purchasing power has the same effect as an increase in prices. To measure purchasing power in the traditional economic sense, you could compare the price of a good or service against the price index, such as the Consumer Price Index. Governments usually establish policies and regulations to protect the currency's purchasing power and keep the economy healthy. They also monitor economic data to stay on top of changing conditions, which happens all the time. Now, CPI is one of the measures of inflation and purchasing power. They also calculate the change in the weighted average of prices of consumer goods and services, transportation, food, and medical care at a given time. According to new research, evolutionary theorists trace many sex-gender differences back to natural selection and 6 specific adaptations. Sociocultural and biosocial theorists, in contrast, emphasize how social roles and power contribute to 6 gender differences beyond any biological distinctions. By connecting to empirical advances over the past 2 decades, 6-fold increase in sex-gender difference, meta-analysis, and in experiments conducted on the psychological effects of power, the current research offers a novel empirical examination of whether power differences play an explanatory role in sex-gender differences. Analysis addressed to whether experimental manipulation of power and sex-gender differences produce similar psychological and behavioral effects. We first identified 59 findings from the published experiments and power. We then conducted a P-curve of the experimental power literature and established that it contained evidential value. Next, having subsumed these effects of power into 11 broad categories, they compared them to 102 similar meta-analytic 6-gender differences. They discovered that high-power individuals and men generally displayed higher agency, lower communion, more positive self-evaluations, and similar cognitive processes. Overall, about 71% of the 6-to-1 gender differences were consistent with the effects of experimental power differences, whereas only 8% were opposite, representing a 9-to-1 ratio of consistent to inconsistent effects. They also tested for discriminant validity by analyzing whether the power corresponded more strongly to sex-gender differences than extroversion. Although extroversion correlates with power, it has different relationships with sex-gender differences, and these results offer evidence that many sex-gender differences may be explained, at least in part, by power differences. It has been well documented. With 6 gender differences, scientists have not reached a consensus about the underlying causes of those differences. Evolutionary theorists, on the other hand, emphasize that many differences between men and women can be traced back to anatomical and physiological roots that emerge through natural selection and specific adaptations. Well explained, I would say. According to this perspective, males and females develop distinct physical and psychological attributes that proved adaptive throughout the human evolution. Paramount amounts among these adaptive forces are concerned with different roles that men and women play in reproduction. Competitiveness, risk-taking, and aggressiveness has certainly supported male reproductive success because these traits allowed men to secure a greater number of mates. For women, on the other hand, their essential roles in gestation and lactation lead to attributes related to nurturance and communion. Wonderfully so. According to these theories, many psychological and behavioral sex-gender differences are biologically determined and rooted in anatomy and physiology. In contrast, sociocultural and social theorists across the social sciences highlight how socialization processes, social roles, and social power have contributed to sex-gender differences that go beyond any anatomical or physiological distinctions. Building on psychological and sociological perspectives, the gender is socially constructed. These theories specify how sex-gender differences can arise from reinforced through to hierarchical structures, different allocations of resources and tasks, and the values associated with those tasks, and the patterns of social interaction between men and women. For instance, West and Zimmerman's theories that people enact their gender by displaying behaviors in social interactions that have come to be associated with their apparent sex categories through cultural transmission, and they do so in such ways that simultaneously sustain, reproduce, and render the legitimate institutional arrangements, and they are based on sex category. Social, cultural, and biosocial perspectives acknowledge that the division of males and females into roles is partly based on biological differences between the sexes, because males are being considered bigger and stronger. Historically, they have taken hunter and warrior roles, whereas because women carry fetuses and lactate, they have taken on more nurturing roles. However, proportion of these social cultural perspectives argue that sex-based role divisions have become socially reinforced in ways that they are beyond any anatomical or physiological differences between men and women. There you have it. Furthermore, they note that advances in technology, such as birth control pills, formula, breast pumps, surrogacy, have reduced the need for women to be placed in caretaker roles. Similarly, the rise of office professions have reduced the importance of physical strength for many tasks, especially for high-status jobs. More broadly, contemporary organization and life makes biologically based sex-gender differences less irrelevant. That's it. One of the differences between evolutionary and biosocial theories is how they treat differences between males and females. Evolutionary psychology treats males and females as discrete kind with categorically distinct behavior repertoire. For instance, males are supposedly more likely to share common characteristics with each other than they are with females. Social, cultural, and biosocial perspective view sex-gender differences as dimensional, where men and women vary by degree, not by kind. Social, cultural, and biosocial theories propose at one variable that plays a role in producing sex-gender differences is the psychological experience of power, defined as the actual or perceived control over valuable resources. Across domains in society, men frequently have greater power than women, with organizations, politics, the economy, and even marital relationships. So it seems. Power differences between men and women are likely to be psychologically concept consequential because research reveals that having versus lacking power fundamentally affects individuals' psychological orientation and behavioral propensities. Individuals and groups who possess greater power are structurally advantageous as they seem to have greater access to resources and opportunities, evaluated more positively, and are deferred to more frequently. Furthermore, powerful individuals and groups are often motivated psychologically and materially to maintain their advantages and to keep less powerful members in their disadvantaged places. As a result of these two processes, one structural and one motivational, having high versus low power produces cognitive, affective, and behavioral effects. The psychological effects of power are so deeply ingrained that randomly assigned individuals to a high versus low power role alter psychological and behavioral tendencies in that context. However, the question is, does money make men, or does a man make money? Consider money makes men. All right. Money can influence a person's status, power, and opportunities, those with wealth often have access to better education, healthcare, and social networks, which can shape their identities in life paths. In some societies, success is often equated with wealth, leading individuals to define themselves, and they are worth based on financial status. This can create a culture where money significantly shapes personal and social identities. Now consider a man makes money. The perspective emphasizes personal agency, skills, and hard work. In here, individuals can create wealth through entrepreneurship, innovation, and effort, suggesting that personal qualities and circumstances play a crucial role in financial success. Wealth is often generated through value creation, providing goods or services that meet needs. This viewpoint suggests that person's creativity, intelligence, and determination are what ultimately lead to financial success. The reality is likely to blend both perspectives. Men can provide opportunities and shape identities, but individual actions, decisions, and values also play a critical role in wealth creation. Ultimately, the interplay between personal agency and the influence of money remains complex and varies across different contexts and individuals. Man's value cannot be measured by his buying power, and those who consider the opposite to be true can only be dreaming. Take that to heart. Of course, one can think and become rich, but having become rich does not define the qualities of men. Therefore, I will say, how much money one has does not mean the person has become a really worthy human. It takes a lot more to create the human into a human. That's a fact. With that, I shall say, we shall meet again by the next episode. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for watching.